Hello and welcome to Identirati Office Hours. I'm your host, Mike Schwartz, founder of Glue. Today is episode 142. Please follow IOH on LinkedIn. Comments and reposts also help us to get the word out about episodes. Feed the algorithm. Our guest today is Manoj Kumar, Director, PAX Identity. Welcome, Manoj.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for having me.
So before we dive into the topic today, how did you get here?
How did I get to this webcast?
How did you become director of
Right. Yeah.
identity and get sort of sucked into the identity governance?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I should trace this back 13 years to when we bumped into a few identity management projects at financial institutions. And we set up a company called Cubera with my partners in the US, a couple of partners in the US. And we grew it to a reasonable size. And to get it acquired by KPMG, we delivered a few projects, had fun with IGA, PAM, and everything else in between in the process. And then I spent 5 years at KPMG as a consultant, getting exposed to this space, working with a wide variety of customers, specifically on identity and access management as the practice lead there. And then when I left KPMG in 2020, I decided to own the problem, be the director of identity and access management at Philip Morris International. And that was quite the experience, because being a consultant is one thing, but owning the problem of running the authorization, authentication, governance, and privileged access management stack for identity, including directory services and all of that, was hugely beneficial for me. And we were doing that during COVID, running a large program across multiple streams and delivering that to the expectations of stakeholders, including the CISOs and CTOs, whatnot. So that was a revealing experience for me. And I kind of looked back and said, I've done the consulting side. I know what it takes to actually run identity access management organizations of scale, 5 million entitlements, 120,000 users across the globe and all of that. Now, shouldn't I take this information, take this newfound knowledge back into the industry? And that's how I found PAX Identity. And our express intent is to make identity and access management simple and consumable. And we call it solving identity because it's unsolved as on today, right? We've not really, found, fixed key pieces of the puzzle. So my intent is to find out a way to actually confront and address the abiding problems that we have come across in the space of identity. And that's why I'm here.
Very interesting. So the topic today is IGA, from automation to intelligence. And I'm going to start with a basic question. Is IGA the most cost-effective way for large enterprises to buy security?
I know I'd be short for this opinion, but I think the straight answer to that is no. And the reason why I say that is we are not in the 2010s. We are in 2025 today. We are talking about any organization of a reasonable size has looked at this problem. They have pulled together fundamental processes in place. And I don't think this is the time to actually start from scratch and start deploying IGA solutions from day one on its own. Now, this is not a generic statement. There will still be others who have not got the fundamentals right, and they probably have to start from square one or square zero for that matter. But I'm talking about a FTSE 200 entity in a regulated sector. Do they need to start from square one? Do they need to start on a new IGA program as it is practiced today from scratch? I don't think. No, you don't have to do that.
So the natural follow-up question for me is, why are people doing it? You're saying, if Manoj says we don't need to do it, but why are we saying, oh well, here's, I know I've in the past I've approved 3-year contracts for this at my previous engagement, and now I'm starting up this business and I see this group of people wants to do this 3-year IGA. It seems reasonable, right? It's been done in the past, so so why are we still doing these projects then?
That's a great question, and I have kind of myself asked this question to me: why are organizations doing it? And if I look at my clients and why they are doing it, there are very genuine reasons why they are doing it, and those reasons range from the fact that their tech stack has changed. So they, for example, have bought a new tech stack, moved resources to the cloud. They've gone through acquisitions, so which means new technologies come in. Some technologies get decommissioned, or as tech debt, they are kind of stood down. The fact of the matter is, IGA touches each and every part of the organization. It touches each and every user. So there's no way of actually looking away from the fact, once you're on that path, to not keep on onboarding new services, build the access control policies, build the governance around that, in the same way that you have done the rest. So there will be pieces that will keep on, hitting the clients or hitting customers every time, because of the change in external factors, and also some of the factors that are internal.
So I'm based here in Austin, and a lot of your listeners might know that SailPoint's also based here. So we have a great relationship with SailPoint, and we love SailPoint. And I have some friends who work and were co-founders of SailPoint, including Darren Rolls. And Darren actually said, and this was maybe 10 years ago, but he said basically nothing's really changed in the identity governance market. And I think that's true, and part of the reason why it's such a great software business. But my question is like, how do we get here? How do we, how do we get to this point where we say, okay, there's plumbing, we're good at that. We need the plumbing to move the data around, but there's something more. We need governance, and then this whole practice around governance. How do we actually get here? And was Darren correct that it hasn't really changed? Since when, would you say?
Essentially, yes, I agree with that statement. If you look back into the late 90s, when the directory systems were set up, the LDAP directory used to be the source of truth in IT. And then around that time, on-premise HR systems were built from paper to written into software, all the records being managed
PeopleSoft.
PeopleSoft, yeah, is probably a good soft, and JD Edwards, and whatever that came in before that. But so it started from the early 90s, when there is this concept of correlating, the concept of an identity coming up, by correlating what the IT attributes with the HR attributes. Say, this is the person, this is the individual, this is the department this belongs to, and this is the person, this is the access for that person. And for any access that the person needs, they have to go through a directory where a group is created, and the person is basically accessed that. So it's all started from there. Now, what has happened from there on is that, with the coming of Sarbanes-Oxley, they were, and the 2008 financial crash and everything else, the regulatory environment changed, and that's when the likes of SailPoint, were very successful in the UK market, especially in the financial services sector, in getting a lot of financial services clients, and some of which I was we implemented some of the solutions for them at that stage as well. So, and that was primarily to do with not just the correlation, but also the access control, in terms of integrating access to applications, to certifying access, to basically as evidence to say that you have checked who has access to what on a periodic basis, and
Yeah.
providing a platform to do that.
And
Now,
IGA and IAM were sort of hand in glove at the time. Like they were different domains, but connected, right?
it was all connected, and this was happening when all the kind of progress, all in parallel to everything that was happening on the authentication side with single sign-on and everything, right? It was SAML 1.0, whatever came in, probably the late 2010s or something like that. So that was a period of disruption. But strangely, with the IGA, and this is my theory, right? And I may be wrong, because again, I'm still a student in this area, right?
Well, that's
My
why it's office hours. It's okay to have any crazy ideas on this live stream.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's a crazy idea indeed, because there was an opportunity for the for someone to ask to say that, hey, at the end of the day, we are talking about data objects, permission sets, roles, these are all data objects. Why don't we start with the data and then build what is required as a in terms of and build a view of the context, right? At that time, it's not like data science was not available at that point in time. We could have used algorithms to actually identify permissions data, create entitlement stores. And in fact, some of the large investment banks at that point in time, in the early 2010s, they did exactly that. They tried all the conventional solutions and they built their own systems, but they started with entitlement stores, very interestingly. They built entitlement stores of all the
Hmm.
entitlement data from systems, and then used to mine that to actually build profiles and assign those profiles to certain departments. And so the data should have been the starting point. But instead, what happened was that this idea of connecting individual applications took took form, right? And there was this again. It was the basic idea was, if we connect to these applications, we can get permission sets. We can actually read the permission sets from that application. We can actually map those logical containers into the solution, like SailPoint or Savient or any other solution, and then you can request access to that, and then we can publish this to the enterprise, and everything will work. But the problem is that, given the origination of everything of this from the 90s, as I said, the data quality was so poor that just when the permission sets were read, you couldn't make head and tail out of that. That was all system speak. Yeah, and then what? Instead of actually finding an intelligent way to address that, that was thrown out to the end users to basically say, well, these are the four containers you have, and you need to make sense of it, but we can't do much about it because we are just reading data. We're not enriching it. We are not writing back. We are not improving it. We're just reading data. And so the other problem that happened at that point in time is that, at the point of ingestion, this data quality issue came up, and then that started another round of remediation, which went for another few years to actually remediate that data. But I would have first cleansed that data, built that data entitlement store, and then fed that entitlement store to downstream systems to add context, with the added context of real time. I mean, that would have been the right infrastructure to start off with. But I think that's where the diversion has happened that has got us to today. And ever since, we are doing the same thing. We're just onboarding more and more applications, sequential onboarding of applications, which takes months, in a few cases years. Any organization will have significant scale would have 500 to 1,000 applications. If you start onboarding that, and if every onboarding takes about 4 weeks or so, you're talking about a few months to do that, which has kept the identity ecosystem very rich and well fed, with all the consulting partners and everybody, making big bucks out of it. But that's necessarily not the way you address this particular problem.
When we don't want to keep doing this. Yeah. So just to reiterate what you said a little bit. So the Sarbanes-Oxley in 2008, 2009 creates a requirement for a certain type of compliance. And the reaction to that is to create the IGA tools that we have today to put in place the processes and reports that are needed to feed Sarbanes-Oxley. Is that correct?
Sarbanes-Oxley came in about 2003, I think, if I'm not mistaken. I
Uh,
don't know. But then I think the ripple effect of all of that, together with the financial crash and the regulations that came on top of it, all of
mhm,
those basically led to the situation where there were specific reporting that the auditors had to do on financial statements to establish any material deficiencies in access control and the way access control is managed, and that's amongst many other things.
uh-huh,
That led to from the audit committee downwards to the financial controller's office to the IT team, designation of certain systems as SOX sensitive applications. They need to have a certain elevated level of controls because they are SOX sensitive, SOX reporting sensitive. So any system essentially that processes financial data need to be certified. So they needed to be certified, access need to be controlled, ownership need to be looked at, and that control set sat with a overarching control set which we call IT general controls, which is joiners, movers, leavers for people in the organization. As an example, right? So there are a certain set of controls. So IT general controls and the SOX framework together led to certain reporting requirements that basically accelerated the adoption of IGA tools because they, to be honest, although it was pretty unwieldy, they enabled the reporting in an effective manner.
Interesting. So getting back to my original question, I guess I just want to connect the dots and say, well, the problem being solved wasn't make us more secure. The problem being solved was comply with these new corporate regulations. And so it's hard to be surprised that the result is not security. And are what you saying is that at this point, we can waste our time doing this thing that doesn't make us more secure, but takes us a really long time, or we can actually focus on security? Is that the decision we're being faced with?
Yes, well, back in the 2000, 2008, 2015 period, 2008 to 2015 period, um, the way we did IGA actually, improved the control plane from a security perspective because we could actually manage applications, the approval flow for applications. So I would argue that during that particular period, it was not as bad of an investment that was probably required as well, not just from a compliance perspective, but from a security perspective. But over the last decade, the strides that we have made on the authorization and authentication side with the IDPs,
Mm-hmm.
with Okta, with Microsoft Entra, and all of that, with the implementation of conditional access policies, with the implementation of authentication standards, with signals, all of that has basically chipped away at the benefit case for IGA as a security control parameter. Right? Purely from a security perspective. From a compliance, yes, it's still relevant, but from a security perspective, one would argue that are you really getting the value for money for it if you're embarking on a 3-year program and you're spending X number of millions and 100,000 uh, person hours on a program? Are you really getting the value for money out of it? That's our question.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. If I was the CEO of you know, let's say a manufacturing or oil and gas company, and I'm not really a security expert, I'm a domain expert in my field. Um, Even though I know that the reason I'm doing this is because it's mandated by security, I still kind of hope that I am actually getting security for it. Um, like, yes, I'm paying all this money, I'm doing the 3-year project. Yes, I know it's because I need to comply with these regulations, but at the end of the day, I still really hope that that means that I'm secure because I'm reading all about all these companies who are getting hacked every day. And so I hope that it also means that I'm secure. and yet it seems like that it wasn't for the design. I want to move on a little bit from here, um, and go in the new article that you put out, and we announced this on your last article, but your new article is out, so I'm sort of focusing on that one a little more. You say, and in the article is called "The Vanishing Contour of the IGA Business Case," which is sort of what we're getting at, right? Like, does it make sense to engage in that new project, that greenfield one? You're saying we are better off establishing a baseline for access context and the risk associated with it. What would that access context actually look like?
Okay. Again, this will take. There are a few layers to this, right? So let's start with what we have, right? What we have as a perimeter control. I don't mean that literally, but figuratively, in the sense is joiners movers. We have an organization where join in, they get access to stuff, they move roles, they get access to new stuff, and when they leave, their access is revoked, right? And that is the perimeter control that basically works in organizations with various levels of efficacy today. And you need something to actually address that, right? And where there are gaps, you don't need a new solution for that just because there are gaps. You need an intervention to basically address those gaps. And from a technology perspective and from a process perspective, it's not that overarching to basically address that. Now, where does the problem occur? The problem occurs when you actually go into that secondary inner layer, which is the question about, do people who have actually joined the organization, who are actually working in roles, do they have the right access to do stuff, or for the role that they're doing? And is it possible that there's a chance that they have more access than what they require, like privileged access, or they have access to data that they should not have, right? That's the kind of secondary question. And that's when the application layer comes in, where access to applications and all of that. And when I talk about context, I think it is that context, that level of context. And that context comes from a few things. Pretty much like what the discussion that is happening in the non-human identity space and SPIF. It's essentially what SPIF is doing with the non-human identity is assigning a certain level of trust to a process based on certain characteristics and parameters.
Do you mean spiffy?
Spiffy, yeah, exactly. Spiffy, yeah. Yeah, sorry, spiffy.
So it's a way to issue an identifier, i.e. a URI, to a software process,
exactly.
Through presentation of an attestation. Yeah.
Exactly. So we could, when I can see that as a closest parable to what we're trying to do here, is that based on the context of the identity, the process ownership, the part of the organization that person belongs to, the person should be able to navigate within a bunch of applications or processes to request access and to within the governance framework that is available. So that is the first point, to say that, okay, can we establish an access profile with the data that is available? So, and what is the context data? It is the directory data, it is the HR data, it is the organization data, and it is also the important part is the process context. So, when we look at organizations that are critical business processes, critical information assets, the mapping between business processes, information assets, and the placing of the identity in the midst of that, to say, I am XYZ, I belong to this part of the organization, I am working for a process owner for this. So therefore, since these assets belong to this particular process, I have either a birthright access or an elevated access to these systems. That particular, if we can actually establish that profile, it gives us a fundamental baseline to start with the profiling. Now, and that's the context that I'm talking about. Now, irrespective of the context, the third layer that comes inside is that the last mile process of actually having access and managing that access, and that can be policy driven, and that can be policy managed and policy driven, because if they are crown jewels, you can apply certain policy level context to that. Now, so those are the kind of three layers: the overarching JML, the application access layer based on the context of access, and the incidents. And in that, you can actually consume data from Microsoft Entra Graph. You can get Microsoft Entra gives very rich information on context and context data for identity. You can actually consume that to actually enrich your context. And then the final stream being the policy enforcement at the end, which is slightly separated from this because it doesn't depend on context. It depends upon the asset itself. It's applied on the asset itself. So with these three layers, you can actually manage the same problem statement more effectively, which means you're not applying a broad sweep of access recertifications for 20,000 people in an organization in one go. You have access to that. You are applying context to apply the depth of the context drives the depth of controls, right? You're not basically applying the fell sweep of controls. But the challenge with this, so that is the solution. That is probably the target solution. But there's a big challenge here.
Can I just put a pause here for 1 second and just clarify and make sure I'm following you up to this point? So you're saying we could take a one-off approach where we look at every person and we manage them, and we look at every application and we manage it. Or we could have sort of an organization approach and say, I'm not going to manage each person. I'm going to manage the organization. And every time we add a person, it's just going to hopefully work because it adheres with the policies. So that was one thing. The other thing I thought you said, which was really interesting, was that about assets, about how there are a set of policies about people, but then we have assets. Assets, well, that's a good word to talk to business people about, because I understand, if I do an inventory of my assets, then I can kind of know I'm secure, all my assets are secure. However, it's intellectual assets don't actually show up on the balance sheet. So how much is your working like DNS system worth? But that doesn't show up on your balance sheet. So I think in terms of assets, we have our hard assets, and then we have all these intellectual assets, and so but assets, I think, is actually maybe too descriptive of a word, because I have a car that's an asset, right? But the risk isn't associated with the asset. The risk needs to know about the action. So am I letting you drive my car, or am I just letting you unlock my car? The risk associated with those is two totally different things, and the policies would be way different. I need to know if you have a driver's license if you want to drive it. Yes. And so, but it sounds to me like you're saying we have this identity approach on the one hand, and then we have what I would call a capabilities approach on the other hand. And the capabilities includes the assets and the corresponding actions when sort of looked at in their totality. But just am I on the right track with those two ideas though?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I have kind of, I was looking for the name for the second approach. I mean, I call it the knowledge graph, where you have a system that basically learns from the enterprise permission data sets and understand what context to apply based on that. So, typical, you do classical, deep learning, or, you're talking about 3 million entitlements mapped to processes, mapped to identities, right? It's not huge data sets for anything like for something like neural networks or anything like that. But, if you apply certain principles from data science, you can actually try and get insights to apply that, and those insights can be selectively applied to remediate data issues and as well data issues, and address things like data classification as well, right? So, for example, if you give data owners access to the opportunity to actually basically to query the data sets that they own within the enterprise, then they can also apply tags to that data to some extent, to say that, okay, that's how you do it. But for that, you need to build that knowledge graph. And I think we are going into, we are speaking about IGA, but we are not speaking about IGA. We are talking about parallel disciplines that impact IGA. We're talking about understanding how assets, identities, permission sets, and roles and profiles are linked together, and how can we query that and iterate on that and improve that on a continual self-healing basis. So I like to call that the enterprise knowledge graph, which I know there are people who are working on it already, in various shapes and forms, or at the edges of it. But I think in 5 or 6 years, I would be surprised if we don't come across the IGA as a discipline completely goes away, and it's basically replaced by what we call an enterprise knowledge graph.
Interesting. There's a couple of startups in this area. Lasse Andresen started IndyKite, which is, I know, active in this area. And, there's in the open source land, in terms of the authorization space, I have three categories. There's the OPA, Rego sort of approach, where the policies are code, non-analyzable code. And then we have CEDAR, where we have analyzable code. And then we have graphs, so OpenFGA, for example. I guess Okta's also got an OpenFGA hosted service in the graph space. So, yeah, my theory is that there's going to need to be a number of approaches available. But it's interesting to hear you say that there's 3,000 or so permissions or entitlements, and that's not that many. It's a small number.
If you talk about, in the last organization that I worked, there are 3.5 million entitlements, probably 2,500 applications, probably from a data science perspective, that's not a huge lot of data to actually churn through.
Right. And so graphs are good because it's a smaller set of data, and graphs gives us more granularity in terms of reporting and looking at relationships. Actually, Jeff Lombardo from AWS made a comment, something to the effect of, the only certitude is that it will not be called IGA, and that we'll have to find a new term for what this job is going to be. What is your guess about what this new term is going to be?
To be honest, I can't fathom what it would be called. I probably, I have my own theory in terms of how it'll be used.
Right. Well, let's just describe the role. Like, what is this person doing differently from what we're doing today? You say data science. Maybe drill down a little bit more on what you think that would entail.
So, if you look at context data, it's not something that does not exist today, right? So, there are significant context data stores in enterprises today. If you look at the direction that SAP is taking with S4HANA and BTP and everything else that they are doing, the analytics around it, it's just that they are not at the stage where they can expose that context data because some of that is sensitive and to the platform. But that data exists. Likewise with Salesforce. Likewise with all the major vendors. In any enterprise, there are tons of context data to wade through. So, but it's just that when IGA systems import data, they're not importing that context data into the IGA system. They are importing static templates of access control templates and permission data sets, which are static, which is a start, but without context, that data means nothing. And that's why, to some extent, it is the systems are dumb at the moment. To make it more intelligent, what can happen is that the IGA systems stay as it is, but there is a separate store for the context data where we can actually mine and apply that to the IGA data and find a way to really improve and iterate on that. So it could be things like very simple things like role descriptions, could be simple things like composition, whether the composition is right for the particular role or whatever. It could be on the IGA side, right? And it could even be things like whether the configuration of that particular role for that particular application is correct or not based on whatever the context data says. Now, but where the game changes is on the end user and the persona side. For me, the personas are process owners, data owners, application owners, auditors, and the end users. That is where the game changes, because for them today, for me, IGA is a system of record to access other systems of record today. And the system of record that I access to get access to other systems of record is that process is not efficient because we are as good as the data that the system shows me. But with context data, I can take that anywhere. I can publish it. I can actually have a chat interface through Teams to actually talk about what do I need access to. Can you please suggest I've just joined the organization. I need X, Y, Z. How can I get access to this? Basically, you could have an iterative interface. Likewise, for an auditor, it could be a chatty interface to actually NLP or whatever we call it, to make sure that they get the access, they see the data that they want. But the governance around it is again a big question to say, okay, how do we then govern it at the end user level to make sure that you make it pretty relevant and secure at the same time? So I don't see users going anywhere outside an interface like Teams to get access to stuff. They're not going to an access request portal. They're not going to 10 different systems. They're going to all manage it through a chat interface. That's the kind of end result of this, and everything will be driven from there.
I want to ask you sort of an existential question about this. What does governance mean to you? I was at EIC last year, and I heard one of the keynote speakers say, governance means holding people accountable, knowing who to hold accountable. Do you agree with that? And if you don't agree with it, what do you think governance actually means here?
You're asking somebody who's I don't profess to be an expert in that, Mike. But I can take a slightly different view, right? What will give me comfort that my identity and access management systems are governed if I am the owner of that particular problem? And what would really give me comfort is that if you have a context of a high risk access, and if you have an asset that is high risk, whenever those two things collide, or if you have a context of a high risk access over anything, we have a way to prevent, remediate, and that particular process is also governed. It's just not me telling it, but my second line, my auditors agree with that. That process is a preventable process. And the security team, the second line and the third line, or whatever we call it, they have reviewed it and they are comfortable with the process that it is covered. For me, that will give me comfort that it's just not me designing stuff in the air, but across my three lines of defense, they all agree that it is a preventable, which means that we need to have the right context, we need to have the right criticality, we need to be able to measure the data between the two and measure whether that is an event that needs to be monitored, governed, and reported upon. Obviously, first of all, prevented.
I find it interesting that I say when I sort of push you and what really matters, you go to risk management. At the end of the day, you say, okay, what are my biggest risks? What is the most, which are going to have the biggest impact, and how can I prevent that? Because at the end of the day, I think you're right. That is their job, is minimize the risk of this cybersecurity risk, which is immense, and I kind of like in the U.S. being a baseball fan. We have this joke about firing the hitting coach at a major league team. Like by the time you get to the major leagues, you're supposed to know how to hit. So what is the hitting coach really doing at this point? So firing the hitting coach who doesn't normally help your batters hit better. Um, but sometimes I worry that CISOs are a little bit like the hitting coach. Like if there's a big cyber breach, we need somebody to fire. It's going to be you. I wonder if you might feel like a hitting coach. And if I was in that position, my main orientation would be risk management and threat prevention. Um, so I'm just going to ask you, we're a little over on time. I just had one more question. Um, in the conclusion to your most recent article, you said, I'm looking for dynamic policy enforcement at the point of incidence. And you think that this would really be disruptive to the current multi-billion-dollar IGA market. I was wondering if you could dig a little bit more into what you meant by dynamic policy enforcement at the point of incidence, and why is that so important and missing?
Well, so first of all, Mike, I think everybody who's a leader, whether it's SailPoint, Simon, everybody is working on this, and I'd be surprised if they're not working on this, right? Because this is the domain that they have shaped, and they are probably actively working to address this. So, what I meant by the point of incidence is the the classification of the asset being critical, or the context of the access being high risk, either or the behavior that leads the person to actually initiate that access to be high risk, and that's part of the context. So that becomes a point of incidence, right? And when you can, there's a policy that you apply to the asset by default, and that basically policy is global for that particular asset because the asset is of a certain classification. But given that context, can the asset actually can we actually apply an escalation or a denial by default, right? So I think that is the point of incidence context that I was talking about,
Uh,
which has been there in privileged access management for a while.
so the key
But
for you is the asset, though. You said when you have an asset, so your starting point is for the asset, though. Am I correct?
by starting, yes, the primary thing is the classification of asset and having a global point of control for the asset, and then you apply context to that to elevate anything that you need to do that.
At the end of the day, you're saying we need to control access to all our stuff. And as long as we know we have control of our stuff, then we'll still have these processes in place for people, right? We still want people to get onboarded. This isn't going away. We're not going to stop hiring and firing people. But at the end of the day, for us to, if what we care about is risk, we really need to move to an asset orientation rather than a people orientation. And this asset, I would invite you to sort of expand your view, because I don't think asset is rich enough. I would love to say it's asset, because then we could just do an inventory, but it's so hard to do an inventory of your intellectual property rights.
Yeah, asset is it's more than just an application or a server or whatever. It's a data type as well. So
Mhm.
which means you need to get some sort of a classification of the type of data. So, for example, the database example, the type of data that you can access, can read, write, or whatever. The endpoint action that you can do requires the context of classification, and I think that is a more difficult problem to solve. And what I'm saying is that today you are able to solve it by actually using proper mining approaches to that data.
If are you okay maybe staying an extra 10 minutes? Because I want to go over with one more question. Would that be okay, Manoj?
Why not? Why not? Yeah. Absolutely.
And I don't go over a lot. So this is because I think you are really enjoying your insights, and you're sort of like ready to sort of reevaluate what we're doing fundamentally to make sure like we're really like doing the right thing, and not just, I guess that's sort of my MO at Glue too. Um, I wanted to branch a little, just for one moment, into data federation and inter-domain issues, because one of the big changes I would say is that, in let's say 2008, we were mostly dealing with internal data and a little bit of federation. But today we're now in a very federated environment where we're exchanging data, and where there are capabilities that exist that cross organizational boundaries, calling an AI service, everything's going SaaS, so we've become a much more interdomain world, and the policies that we need to make are also interdomain policies. I have this. It's not just when you say the context. Sure, the let's say we can say, oh well, the origin or the issuer is just one of those contextual items, but it's more than that also, because there's trust relationships, and I think it has introduced new challenges around how do we manage sort of these relationships, especially with the intersection of data. And that's the area I wanted to focus on, is this new federated world plus data, and data sharing agreements. Like, let's say I'm an EU company and I need to share data with regulators about carbon emissions so that the EU can, collectively know what their carbon footprint is for a certain industry, let's say. So we have a lot of data sharing and agreements that go across organizational boundaries. And I'm curious if you could just talk about some of the new challenges that you see that come about as a result of like federation.
Sure. So I can give you. That particular example that you've given me. I don't have much of an exposure to that particular use case where you're talking about data sharing agreements between bounds and geographical boundaries. But where we have addressed the problem in multi-cloud environments, where we looked at this problem in multi-cloud environments, um, we have found things like service principles and policy enforcement service principles level, where very very effective when services interdomain services are authenticated between themselves, and there today probably it is not possible to use rich context to those authentication, but can still do a fair amount of from an authorization perspective. There is a lot of options available you can actually apply to the way services authenticate to external providers or an IDP, be it service, be it processes.
Okay, you saw the background change, so I think let's go to last thoughts. Thank you for answering that last question. We maybe have to go deeper on that at a later time, or see how the industry evolves. But any last thoughts for the audience? Or feel free to also tell us about next events you'll be at, maybe where we can meet you in person.
Sure. Well, I have to think about the specific events, but PAX Identity, we are running an event on the 13th of November at the Rosewood Hotel in London, where we're bringing together essentially all the practitioners we talk about common problems in identity management, rollouts. We'll talk about IGA, privileged access management, and we will have a CISO panel as well, talking about their view on how you can get value from identity investments. So if there are people on this webcast who are listening to me now, more than welcome to register on our website on the events under the events section to join us for an evening of rich insights and peer-to-peer networking. But my last thoughts really are: see, this is an evolving space. What we have put together is a challenge. What I have put together through my writing is a challenge to improve the process better. I don't have all the answers. I think where the answers lie can be looked at in much more depth. And we can definitely make IGA better than how it is delivered today. And some of the vendors that lead in this space can in fact they're in a prime position to lead this change.
Okay, we just announced the next episode. So the founder of one of the co-founders of StrongDM, Justin McCarthy, will be joining us for an episode, and titles Unlocking Continuous Zero Trust Authorization with Cedar. So looking forward to that next week. And with that, I'll say thank you so much, Manoj, for joining us. It's been really great. And thank you, audience, for tuning in. And we'll see you next time.